How does it look?
You know, there's only so much you can do with a strip of cloth.
I know, but I still want to make it look as good as possible.
Since most people seem to associate her with her mask, Naya figured she should fix it up a bit. Quite frankly, she was rather embarrassed about it when she got back to Say's room and took a good look at herself in a mirror. Since then, she kept making adjustments to it, at least until it fell apart. The mask on her face was the successor to the first, and she felt that it looked much improved. She turned from side to side, examining the latest round of changes. You need professional help, Say said.
What do you mean?
Just ask someone to make you a mask, the bard told her. Like Mr. Abrigo. He's a tailor, isn't he?
Ah, I guess I could do that, Naya said.
I got so obsessed with fixing this thing myself that it didn't cross my mind. Naya removed the mask and stuffed it into her bag. She didn't know how long it would take to make a new one, but there was probably plenty of time before the next gathering.
There's a big session today, Say told her.
Session? Yeah, a court session.
Most of the High Lords are in the capital now. Duke Debonai arrived last night. How do you know that? Naya asked.
The patrons were talking about it last night, the bard said as she pulled on a long, white stocking. I told you that you should have taken up Orlando's offer. Establishments like this are some of the best places for gathering information. Naya imagined herself in Queen Kalka's tight leather outfit, brandishing a whip while she abused information out of a half-naked noble. She quickly shook the scene out of her head, appalled at her own thoughts. I told you I don't want to prostitute myself. Say released a long sigh. And I told you that you don't have to. Pillow talk is a great way to pull information out of people, but they hardly need any encouragement in establishments like this. They feast and drink and brag non-stop here. This is especially true when you have a whole bunch of young noblemen who feel compelled to make themselves look good in front of everyone else. Being a dealer at a casino table is more than enough.
I don't know.
Anyways,
what did they say? About the session, I mean.
Commoners weren't allowed to attend sessions of the royal court without an invitation, which she hadn't received. It made her wonder how she could represent her people's interests, but, when she thought about it, nothing about what she had to say would sit well with the court's attendees anyway.
They called it a general session, Say said.
The nobles that I heard assumed that it will be about deploying their defensive lines along the northern coast. There's a lot of speculation and posturing over who gets to command the army and all that.
I see. Naya sat down on their bed.
That sounds like something that the nobles would do.
Were we mentioned at all? Of course not.
The bard rolled up her other stocking. Nobles only take credit for things that they think are under their control. We're more like a wild card for the conservatives, you know. Ever since the Baraha thing, it feels like you've made a lot of card references.
I haven't, Say told her.
You are just too sensitive about everything. Don't you think you should speak with the Duke about the upcoming session? You are right, but what should I bring up? I don't think the nobles would accept what I've been speaking about in the city. The royalists definitely wouldn't, but you should at least see if the conservatives can be aligned with some of your goals. Some? Naya frowned. It's more like everything about the Holy Kingdom needs to change. The bard got up from the bed and shut the room's tiny window.
Have it your way, Say said.
Let's go and get your mask done. They left the Queen of Thorns and made their way to Mr. Abrigo's home in the eastern quarter. The sound of angry voices preceded their arrival. By the time they turned the corner, however, the voices had ceased and all they saw were the backs of a group of affronted armsmen walking away down the avenue. Naya opened the door to Mr. Abrigo's shop. The tailor was standing behind the front counter, arms crossed as he stared at nothing in particular. Are you all right, Mr. Abrigo? Naya asked.
Yeah, just a bit tired, is all. What did they want?
Same story, pretty much, Mr. Abrigo said. They wanted to order some winter clothing, but we don't have the materials to fill the order at the price that they want. Isn't it a bit early for winter clothing? Say asked.
It is, the tailor nodded. They must be up to something if they can't wait for supplies from the south.
Naya frowned as she considered the new piece of information. What were the nobles fighting over again? Command of the army, deploying defensive lines, winter clothing, can't wait. They're deploying to Sierra Norte, she breathed. They are planning to create a defensive line in the mountains. Sucks for them, Say quipped.
What do you mean? Mr. Abrigo asked.
It's months too soon to be needing winter clothing in most of the Holy Kingdom, Naya explained. We learned that the nobles are planning to deploy their forces to create defensive lines against whatever destroyed this year's trade fleet. The only place where winter clothing will be necessary anytime soon is in the mountains, which is also an excellent place from which to defend against aquatic threats. Just as humans couldn't hope to compete against aquatic denizens on the ocean, aquatic species couldn't hope to fight against humans deep inland. Ensuring that a stalemate was achieved was the best that the Holy Kingdom could do, and it looked like they were fully committed to doing just that. The core is already fortifying the mountain passes, Say said. So the nobles will find themselves late to the show. Is that a problem? The tailor asked. We worked together with them just fine in the Holy Kingdom Liberation Army. It's a problem because they're going to want to take over what we've established, Naya said. They didn't bother us back then because they needed the Sorcerer King to fight against Yaldabaoth. Our people aren't going to accept their hard work being stolen from them. Those strongholds are so much more than defensive fortifications to us. Commander Lubo may just flat out attack them the moment they make any demands, Say said. He hates the nobles and now he has a way to oppose them directly. We need to get a message to Lloyd's, Naya said. No, actually, the messenger only needs to make it to the first conservative-controlled town between here and Lloyd's. Our people stationed there as scouts can get the message to Lloyd's faster than the average civilian can. What are you going to tell them? Say asked. I'd like to warn our people about what's happening, at least, Naya answered. We need to talk with the conservatives about the details and what sort of arrangements are possible. The Corps was more than prepared to fight the Royalist forces, especially from their superior defensive positions in Sierra Norte, but she didn't want to fight them for the wrong reasons. Attacking forces moving to help against a communal threat was an undoubtedly stupid move. It would also cast the Path of Justice's followers in a bad light. All right, Naya said, we should take care of that right away. What about the mask? Say asked. The mask? Naya frowned. Oh. Mr. Abrigo, could you please make me a new mask? The ones I'm using keep falling apart. And here I thought they held some symbolic meaning, Mr. Abrigo said. Symbolic? Yeah, like a representation of the people's plight or something. That's pretty poetic, Say said. You think so? The tailor scratched his cheek bashfully, then cleared his throat. I can get one made for you, Miss Baraha. How would you like for it to look? Nothing flamboyant, Naya replied. Actually, do you remember the mirror shades that I used during the war? I do, Mr. Abrigo nodded. I could never figure out what that thing was made out of, but I can get some folks together to make a decent imitation. Naya's eyes widened. Really? That's great. What do I owe you? Honestly, I can't say how much it would cost until we make it. We'll need a few different trades working together to get it done. Don't worry about paying, though. Are you sure about that? It'll be made out of scrap and slag, so yeah. Not that it'll look terrible. We might even be able to get the tint of the glass right. Naya thanked Mr. Abrigo profusely before crossing the city to exit out of Remian Gate. Given the news about the general session, the atmosphere in the camps wasn't as lively as she thought it would be. Maybe they were all waiting for the outcome. Hold, woman. Two armsmen stopped her at the entrance of Lord Vigo's camp. One of them brandished his halberd warily while the other approached her. I'm here to see Lord Vigo, she told them. I doubt such a suspicious-looking woman has any business with Lord Vigo, the armsman said. And why are you armed with a bow? Toss her into the latrine. Naya's hair rose as the armsman grabbed her by the wrist. The voice that barked out the order sounded again. Whoa. Does one usually heed an order like that without hesitation? I'll handle her. Lord Lugo appeared from behind the armsman, sporting a wide grin. I must wonder how you manage from day to day with troubles like that, he said. Not easily, Naya grumbled, but no one's ever ordered me tossed into a latrine, either. You have my apologies for that, Miss Baraha. Lord Lugo lowered his head slightly. There are so many houses camped around Hobans right now that even everyday affairs have become a competition. Everyone is trying to be at their best in order to impress. To what end, Lord Lugo? Naya asked. I'm sure, by now, you must have heard of the general session, Lord Lugo said, offering his arm to her. That is why you have come. yes?
Yes, that's right.
Naya joined the handsome young nobleman. They say that everyone's jockeying for leadership positions in the Holy Kingdom's armies.
I suppose that's one way to put it, Lord Lugo said.
I also suppose that most would find it a frivolous activity.
I don't think it's frivolous, Naya said.
I just don't understand how debating in court helps decide who is most suited to command. Is that how people imagine it?
The nobleman arched an eyebrow.
While I can't say the discourse will be entirely absent of politics, the best choices for command are usually clear. The politics part is also something of a given, as it ensures as little friction as possible within army divisions. They crossed the well-guarded perimeter of the camp's core, where Naya found many conservative nobles lounging beneath the dozens of pavilions scattered across the grounds. Again, there was little sign of overt excitement or anticipation over the coming court proceedings. Most of the noblemen were discussing things quietly or spectating a variety of war games.
What concerns me, Lord Lugo, Naya said, is that there doesn't seem to be any thought given to how anyone outside of the court feels about those arrangements.
It's not that there aren't,
Lord Lugo replied.
It's just that addressing the individual concerns of millions of people is practically impossible. That's why we have leaders who are counted upon to represent the interests of their houses and their fiefs. Additionally, relying on the opinions of the uninformed and inexperienced is hardly a sound strategy. I know a lot of career soldiers who've had less than flattering things to say about the aristocrats they've served under, Naya told him.
My father included.
So you're afraid that whoever the court appoints to command won't respect the opinions of your people?
Naya nodded.
The troublesome loose ends created by the core northern campaign aside, that was what she was most worried about. We've worked hard to build up what we have so far, Naya said. Whatever it is that destroyed the trade fleet is our obvious priority, but, if someone appointed by the royal court decides to just take everything we've created, I can guarantee you that the attempt won't end well. It's something that our faction has taken into consideration, Lord Lugo told her. The royalists, however, are a different matter entirely. That will be something we'll have to puzzle out as we go along. So that's your taste in women, Lugo? Naya froze as hundreds of gazes fixed onto her. Lord Lugo shook his head, walking into a nearby pavilion. You are going to find yourself sprouting an arrow, Aston. And not from me. It was a joke. Lord Aston smiled as he gestured to the cushy seats next to him. Well, half a joke. Miss Baraha's name does carry a certain amount of heft these days. Lord Lugo rolled his eyes and took a seat next to Lord Aston. Several familiar faces from around Lloyd's were present with him. She's not a noblewoman, Lord Lugo said. Though, on a not entirely unrelated note, the royalists don't recognize her at all. That's something we're going to have to figure out before this coalition army gets underway.
Good afternoon, Lord Aston.
Naya bobbed her head. Did you just arrive from the north?
Not 2 hours ago, Lord Aston replied.
Please,
there's no need to stand on
ceremony. Naya took a seat next to Lord Lugo. Say appeared on a stool off to the side, plucking idly on the strings of her lute.
Oh, music, Lord Aston said.
I didn't realize how hard it was to find a bard in the north until recently. All of Hobans, including the camps, must have a grand total of 3. Is Lord Vigo not in the camp? Naya asked. He went to attend the court session with Duke de Bonai and several other high lords, Lord Aston answered. It's already started? This morning.
Oh, Naya said. I thought that, since everyone was here, nothing was happening.
The noblemen seated around the pavilion exchanged amused looks. Naya frowned, wondering if some joke was being made at her expense. There are 10,000 houses camped around Hobans, Miss Baraha, Lord Lugo explained. Trying to squeeze everyone into the session would be, well, the High Hall of Hobans is designed to accommodate several hundred, at most. It would give a quite little meaning to the stuffy nobles thing I hear once in a while, Lord Aston smirked. Only the high nobles are attending the session. The rest of us wait for the results out here just like everyone else, unless one is specifically called upon for one thing or another. That made sense. Naya had attended at least 2 court sessions in the past, once during her training as a squire and the other during the award ceremony after the war, so she should have realized not everyone would have been able to fit. Does anyone know what it's about? Naya asked. All we've heard were rumors about mobilizing the Holy Kingdom's armies to the north. From the armsmen that we've observed in the city, the royalists look like they're preparing for it, as well. That's the general assumption, Lord Aston nodded. It is an assumption, though. We should know what the assembly was called for by the end of the day. If it is, Naya said, doesn't that mean it's too late to change what they decide on? I didn't even get to say anything. Lord Aston snorted. It's far from too late. While General Session sounds like a single event, this is, in reality, the first session of the General Session. We're looking at the General Session lasting anywhere between 2 weeks and a month, with follow-up sessions throughout the autumn and winter. But, isn't that far too long? What if we're attacked while they deliberate? That's the way the world works, is it not? Lord Aston said. One either ensures that they are prepared to move, or they are forced to move with what preparations they've made. I don't think this is something unique to the nobility. The sheer scale of the effort means that it will take at least that long, Lord Lugo told her. This defense of the northern coast will tie up at least 500,000 of the Holy Kingdom's citizens, and we must assume that our sea lanes cannot be used. New logistics must be hammered out, new infrastructure must be raised and maintained. The royal court is not so much deliberating as it is ensuring that we don't all die of starvation, exposure, and disease a month into the campaign. Which is where you and your followers may come in handy, Lord Aston said. Naya's eyes went over to the other nobleman. Handy? If we understand it correctly, Lord Aston said, your people have already laid down the foundations of the infrastructure that the army needs in Sierra Norte. Between that and the soldiers you've stationed there, you can offer a contribution that the royal court has no choice but to respect. Ideally, this should also tie up all of the loose ends that have cropped up in recent weeks. That would be nice if it's true, Naya replied. But will it be so straightforward? We sort of waged an unofficial war along the northern coast. It should be, Lord Lugo said. At least in my eyes, you've more than adequately justified your actions, plus you've observed the conventions of war. I'm not sure whether you've done so by accident or not, but you've been playing by the rules of the establishment. Once the matter of your hostages has been settled, you have a done deal. Assuming they haven't eaten the hostages, Lord Aston added. We didn't eat them, Naya bristled. If that's the case, I should get a message to my people. May I borrow one of your couriers? Of course, Miss Baraha. You can find everything you need to pen your missive at the desk over there. Naya felt much better once her message was on its way. When she left the camp, Lord Aston tried to keep say, but the bard insisted on sticking with her. Are you sure about that? Naya asked. I'm happy that you want to stay with me, but you could have made a lot of money. It's not like bards particularly care about money, Say said. It's just something that you get if you're good at what you do. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for her daily meeting. Unfortunately, her new mask wasn't done yet, but Mr. Abrigo ended up stitching together something much more workable than what she had to use in the meanwhile. As evening approached, she made her way to the gathering in the northern quarter. Several volunteer organizers came up to her when she entered the courtyard nestled in a ring of workshops. Miss Baraha, the leader said. We have a problem. A problem? Naya blinked. The turnout for this evening looks like it's going to be far more than anticipated. Oh, that kind of problem. It's a good problem to have, I think. Something like that happened yesterday, and there were no issues moving the gathering to one of the plazas. Well, the nobles dispersed us in the end, but everything was peaceful. I heard about that. In that case, we're going to have to use the main plaza. Eh? The northern quarter's market plaza was quite large. If it was necessary to host their function, just how many were coming? How did we end up with so many people? Naya asked. Word of mouth, as far as I can tell. The folks who heard you the other day went to get the people they knew from around the city. I hear the people from the eastern quarter are doing it, too. I see. Please thank everyone for their enthusiasm and hard work. This is a good thing. It has to be. What she most feared was that the residents of Hobans would be entirely apathetic to her words, just as the people had been in some of the worst towns on the northern coast. Instead, the truth was spreading rapidly. The people were hungry for justice. They had to wait for the merchants in the main plaza to pack up their stands before setting up their makeshift platform on one side of the square. As twilight faded, dozens, then hundreds of people started filtering in to gather around her. Only a handful carried torches, and most of them came forward to help illuminate the platform. Naya could only guess at how many people there were in the dim lighting before she stepped up onto her wooden platform. Naya took a deep breath, looking up at the field of stars overhead. She would have to do the same thing that she had outside of Lloyd's for her voice to reach everyone properly. Thank you, everyone, for coming to hear me at this late hour. I'm happy to see so many new faces, happy to see that the citizens of Hoban still yearn for. That will be quite enough. A man's voice clashed with hers. Naya frowned in confusion, looking for its source. Out of the far corner of the square, 2 rows of torches appeared, cutting their way through the crowd. As they came closer, Naya made out a column of fully equipped armsmen. It took her a moment to recognize Eduardo Cohen leading them, flanked by 4 knights. He looked up at Naya from the pavement at the base of her stand as his armsmen created a cordon around them. Faceless one, he said in an authoritative tone that was neither angry nor otherwise excited, stand down and disperse your followers. But we just got here, Naya said. And we haven't done anything wrong. You are disrupting the order of the city, the lordling told her. Additionally, you are to come with us for questioning. What? Why? Don't make me repeat myself. I said we haven't done anything wrong. That is for the authorities to determine. I pray, for your sake, that you choose to cooperate. The air fell still as they stared at one another in tense silence. She already knew enough about the royalists that it wouldn't just end with questioning. I refuse, Naya said. I haven't. Seize her. 2 of the knights stepped onto the platform. Naya backed away, slapping aside their grasping gauntlets. She breathed a sigh of relief as the knights looked to one another and backed off. Then, she and Say let out a cry as they upended the platform. Before she could get back to her feet, the 2 other knights grabbed her by the arms. Let me go. Naya squirmed. I haven't done anything wrong. Her booted heels scraped against the cobblestones as the knights dragged her around the toppled platform. Voices of protest started to rise around them. What are you doing, you thugs? The faceless one is right. We haven't done anything wrong. Is it a crime to stand on the street? Get out of our city, you parasites. The crowd pressed in, pushing against the cordon of armsmen. Lord Eduardo turned around and stilled them with a look. Know that we have come at the behest of House Lagoa, which has been granted authority over this district by the crown. Oppose us at your own peril. Naya dug in her heels as she continued to struggle against the 2 knights. Her struggling seemed to snap her closest followers out of their paralysis, and they resumed their attempts to intervene. Lord Eduardo sighed and raised his hand. Wait. Naya cried, no one do anything. Don't give them an excuse to retaliate. Damn it, I hate this. As usual, the royalists had the upper hand when everyone had to play by their rules. Seemingly anything could become a justification to act in favor of their interests. Are you 2 truly having so much trouble with a mere woman? Lord Eduardo frowned at Naya and the 2 knights. She's pretty strong, Lord Eduardo. Is that so? Release her. Naya lost her balance and fell on her butt. A hand took her by her wrist, pulling her back to her feet. What is this? He's so strong. Naya knew that Lord Eduardo was more dangerous than Sir Torres back after her duel with the knight, but she had no idea that Lord Eduardo was so powerful. The nobleman showed absolutely no sign of exertion. He wasn't yanking her or even being rough. She was just being helplessly pulled forward as if she were nothing but a little girl. Stop. Let go. You can't do this. She may as well have been protesting against a boulder. All around her, her followers bit their lips and wore tormented expressions as they had little choice but to watch her get dragged away. Suddenly, the pulling stopped. The hand holding her wrist was in turn being held around the wrist by someone else. You've overstepped the bounds of your authority. Naya stared, wide-eyed at the new voice. Her gaze followed the plate-encased arm up to see the sigil of the Holy Order emblazoned on a pristine white scapula. Sister Custodio, Lord Eduardo said. I assure you that we are well within our rights to apprehend this woman. She has a well-documented history of cultivating resentment against the authorities. It isn't a crime to speak one's mind in the Holy Kingdom, Remedios said. Release this citizen. Immediately. A paladin standing behind Naya caught her as she was suddenly released. To Naya's shock, Lord Eduardo shook away Remedios' hand. The royal court will hear of this, Sister Custodio. So what? Lord Eduardo turned away at Remedios' unbothered reply. He and his men left the square as quickly as they had arrived. Naya stared incredulously at her unexpected savior. "You saved me," she said. "Why?" Naya flinched as Remedios turned her sharp-eyed gaze on her. 6 years a squire, Remedios said. "Yet, in all that time, you never managed to grasp the meaning of justice." An ember of anger ignited within Naya. Remedios dared to speak of justice? To her? Remedios shook her head at Naya's furious expression. "We swore an oath to uphold the justice of the Holy Kingdom, Baraha," she told her. "To protect the country and its citizens against threats from without and within, but I thought you hated me." "Why does that matter?" Remedios frowned. "Justice is blind, Baraha. It doesn't defer to preference or bend for convenience. There are no exceptions, no concessions. That means we don't purposely slaughter hostages or put arrows into our own children. By the way, it's too bad that damn Sorcerer King corrupted you to the point that you've replaced justice with all those empty ideas about strength. How dare you? The Sorcerer King is justice." Naya trembled in fury as Remedios spoke. What right did she have to say anything? She was weak, and the weak should humbly accept the justice of the Sorcerer King. "It seems that my words are wasted on you," Remedios said. "Well, you can't say I never tried. Have a good evening, Miss Baraha. I wonder what that blithering fool has prepared for us today." "Prepared?" Antonio Cohen snorted. "I doubt anything he brings up will possess any semblance of preparation. At best, it will be another idea with little or no thought put into it." "Perhaps," Martha replied, "but the ladies I've spoken with seem to expect something momentous, or at least their houses do." Antonio looked out of the window of his carriage as it slowly rolled through Earth Avenue on its way to the Prime Estates. That much was clear from all the retainers frantically going about trying to make preparations in light of the rumors. They were simply rumors, however. Given Caspon's history of bunny-brained idiocy, Antonio didn't expect anything coherent or even relevant out of the general session. He wouldn't be surprised if the Holy King had called everyone together for the express purpose of taste testing the first batch of bread and olive oil produced from the North's ongoing harvest. "Speaking of those rumors," Antonio said, "how has Eduardo reacted to them?" "You are far too protective of the boy," his wife put on a gentle smile. "He hasn't done anything, of course. We didn't raise a fool that jumps at every sensational whisper and turn of court fashion. Thank the gods for that. He's far too influential with the scions. If Eduardo got himself hooked, half of the army would already be on the march." Every generation had its heroes, and House Cohen had been blessed with one of them. Upon recognizing his potential, Antonio had spared no expense to ensure that he was given an upbringing suited to one of his future stature. Overall, he was proud of how Eduardo was turning out, but a father's duty did not simply end when their children became adults. "In that case," Martha said, "what do you think Caspont has called us together for?" "I won't engage in pointless speculation," Antonio replied. "We'll hear it in person soon enough. Assuming he hasn't slept in again." An exasperated sigh escaped Antonio's lips. The man was truly an embarrassment to the country. Every time he thought Caspont couldn't make things worse, he did, and that was a foreboding trend in light of the coming general session. Their carriage reached the Earth Gate, where the stationed armsman waved it through. Annoyingly, the crowded conditions got much worse with all of the vehicles conveying their passengers to the palace. Antonio drummed his fingers on his armrest, staring at the head outside his door for a full 5 minutes before placing his hand on the latch. "Dear, you're not thinking about walking, are you?" "Of course I am," Antonio replied. "It's less than 200 meters to the palace gate. Less than that, if we cut through the gardens." "But you've probably gone shopping in the garden markets 3 times more often than I assume you have. You know, it's reservations like this that make the commoners think we can't even put food in our own mouths." He disembarked and strolled over to the carriage behind him while Martha did whatever women did to prepare themselves for walks. The tinted window of the carriage opened, revealing a familiar face. "Count Cohen," Count Over nodded in greeting. "This is quite mad, isn't it?" "And I won't partake in any of it," Antonio replied. "We'll be 2 hours late to the session, at this rate." "A quick excursion, then?" "So long as our wives don't stop to buy anything." He collected 3 more high nobles before the others started following suit on their own. As with anything, swaying the consensus required leadership. When he returned to his carriage, he found Martha awaiting him under a pastel yellow parasol that matched her silken garb. She didn't take that long just to pull out that thing, did she? Shall we have the carriage await you at the palace, my lord? One of his footmen asked.
Of course not, Antonio replied.
Park it in a lane close to the earth gate. I'd rather not be forced to experience this same hell on the way out like some poor, helpless peon.
Very good, my lord.
Antonio awaited the other high lords beneath the broad arbor marking the entrance to the market gardens. A dozen felt like a suitable entourage, and he led them through the shaded lanes between the meticulously manicured grounds. You say that waiting in that traffic would make us 2 hours late, Count Over said, but I suspect we would in reality be an hour early. The trailing nobleman chuckled at the Count's unabashed jibe. Indeed, it seemed that Caspond had long lost any and all respect from his vassals. Anyone care to make a wager on what this general session is about? Another noble asked. It couldn't possibly be about anything relevant to our current situation. Caspond is so random that it's a bet all of us are almost guaranteed to lose, Antonio answered. What's important is we show solidarity in the face of whatever is brought up today. What if it's a matter of personal preference? Then I won't begrudge you for your preferences, Antonio replied with a smirk. One can only pray that today's topic will be so mundane. After a leisurely stroll of 10 minutes, they arrived in front of the palace gate. He smiled behind his dignified mask as the doors to the carriages awaiting their turn opened and his peers scrambled out to avoid looking like idiots. Everyone arranged themselves in order of precedence in front of the throne room entrance, with Antonio taking his place near the back. To his surprise, he found Duke de Bonai standing there with Count Vigo. Count Cohen, the Duke said. I see that we weren't the only ones fed up with waiting. I never imagined that I'd see the leader of the Conservatives embarking on such an unconventional course, Your Grace. There's nothing traditional about waiting in traffic, Lord Cohen. How many came with this latest wave? Antonio leaned to the side slightly, taking a quick count of the nobles queued before the throne room doors. We'll have about half of the expected attendees, Antonio said. Would Your Grace happen to know what your dear cousin has in store for the court? He imagined the Duke's expression souring upon being associated with Caspond, and, honestly, Antonio couldn't blame him if he did, but the older man didn't react to his prodding. Regrettably, Duke de Bonai replied, His Divine Grace keeps his own counsel. Not even the Holy King's cabinet seems to have any idea what this is about. Isn't it about time that you progressives gave up any hope of running a functional country under the current government? I have no doubts about whether the country can remain functional under the current government, Antonio replied. In fact, I see our circumstances as the prime opportunity to pull the Holy Kingdom out of the past and into the present. Too long have we squandered our maritime advantage. The entire world lies at our doorstep, yet we shun it in favor of tradition and superstition. If that's the case, shouldn't you have rallied under Prince Felipe's banner? Who is to say that we wouldn't? That was one thing the Duke and his faction didn't seem to understand, or at least pretended not to. The Royalists' economic dominance over the Holy Kingdom would have decisively proven to the merchant prince who was best suited to serve as the driving force in the Holy Kingdom's government. Caspond's escalating incompetence wasn't a problem, all they had to do was replace him with Felipe. Of course, Felipe was presumed dead, but that only meant they had to wait a year for the next trade fleet while propping up a new candidate for the throne. This would serve to give the Royalists more time to consolidate their economic lead and further chip away at conservative power. At precisely the appointed time, the doors to the High Hall of Hoban swung open and Antonio went to take his place in the line. The lords of the Holy Kingdom entered by order of precedence going from the lowest to highest ranks. First came the high nobles, then the representatives of the temples, and finally the members of the royal house, which included Duke de Bonai. Everyone filed into the hall and arranged themselves in neat rows along the central aisle, and, then, they waited 3 hours for the Holy King to appear. Even with the balcony windows thrown wide open, the air became so stifling that many of the women wearing their multi-layered gowns had to excuse themselves from the hall. There must be some limit to this absurdity. Antonio felt like he was a character in one of the songs that third-rate bards performed in nameless pubs to mock the imagined foolishness of the elite. A part of him mocked himself for being such a fool for putting up with yet another episode of Caspond's buffoonery. He did his best not to glare at the man as he sauntered over to the throne with what appeared to be a roasted lanka rib sticking out of his mouth. Hank how for homing, ma LRDS, he spoke around the thing in his mouth, then pulled it out and tossed it over his shoulder. It has occurred to us that we have a problem.
Oh, you don't say?
He didn't even know where to begin with a retort. The Holy King, however, plowed ahead, oblivious to the disgust of his court.
The crown has no money, he said. And without money, we cannot function.
Isn't that right, Minister, Royal Treasurer?
Our government doesn't have a Royal Treasurer, Your Divine Grace, the Minister of Finance replied.
Oh,
is that so? Caspon donned a troubled expression. We are beginning to understand how we have arrived in our present predicament. Worry not, however. The gods have blessed us with a solution. Since when do the gods give financial advice? Antonio couldn't help but frown at the Holy King's beatific visage. It was apparent that they were not only dealing with a fool, but a madman as well. Caspon continued smiling stupidly at the assembly, looking back and forth in open anticipation. What solution might that be, Your Divine Grace? The Prime Minister asked.
Taxes,
Caspon answered.
Taxes?
Taxes. Caspon beamed. It's obvious, in hindsight. If we do not have any money, then all we have to do is make some money. What in the name of all that is holy is wrong with this man? Antonio's unspoken sentiment was echoed by the silence greeting the idiot's words. Once again, he was entirely oblivious to the court's reaction, his mad grin widening all the more. Genius, we know, he said, but that is why we are the Holy King. Royal Treasurer, you are the Royal Treasurer now. By the way, how much will we need to restore the operations of the Royal Army by the winter? The Minister of Finance stole a look at the assembly, as if fearful they would strike him down for answering. Antonio, however, was far past the point of caring, and he suspected it was the same for everyone else. In terms of materiel and provisions alone, the Minister of Finance said reluctantly, we would have to raise land taxes by over 13,000% to accommodate Your Divine Grace's proposal by the target date. Caspon's smile slipped off his face. 13,000%? Yes, Your Divine Grace. Well, that's entirely unreasonable. The Minister of Finance audibly sighed in relief. We should be able to make 10,000 work, Caspon said. Isn't that wondrous? A whole quarter of the increase, negated by our divine brilliance. With that, our full authority can be restored and everyone may return south with their retinues. They must miss their homes, yes? If one of the paladins guarding the dais turned around and caved the lunatic's head in, Antonio was certain that no one would hold it against them. In fact, it was probably the paladins preventing a member of the court from running up and ending the madman himself. Why, Your Divine Grace, the Minister of Finance said, I'm afraid that even 10,000% is also impossible. With that negative attitude of yours, we suppose that it is. Why not think of the good of the Holy Kingdom? In front of Antonio, Duke de Bonai looked over his shoulder with an unasked question on his face. Antonio held his gaze and nodded. Your Divine Grace, Duke de Bonai's voice rang through the chamber. I must regret to inform you that the entire House of Lords must reject your motion with the utmost disapproval. My motion? Caspond rose from his throne with a befuddled look. My motion? This is not a motion, it is a decree. A royal edict. This is not the Baharuth Empire, the Duke told his cousin. Even the bloody Emperor needed the support of his allies to make any arbitrary decrees. What Caspond was attempting was unheard of in any country that Antonio knew of. I am no mere emperor, Caspond said. I am the Holy King, the chosen representative of the four great gods in this mortal coil. Do you dare defy the will of the gods? Duke de Bonai stared at the Holy King for a good, long time. In the end, he reached up to straighten the lapels of his coat. We are done here. With that, the Duke strode toward the exit. Good, Caspond's smile returned as he nodded. I expect the payments to begin arriving by the end of the week. Is he so oblivious that he doesn't even realize what happened? Antonio joined the crowd of high nobles making their way out of the throne room. He searched for his wife outside and took her by the hand. My lord husband, Martha said. What's going on? We just saw the Duke storm out of the throne room, now all this. The government has dissolved, Antonio told her. Dissolved? Martha gasped, but that means civil war. He slapped her across the face. His wife cradled her cheek. tears gathering in her shocked eyes. "Calm yourself, Lady Cohen," he said firmly. "Remember what I said before. We must show solidarity, no matter what is brought up in court today. If you panic, the other ladies of the court will panic and this thing will become far worse than it actually is." Antonio held her gaze until she nodded in understanding. She fixed her face into a resolute expression, which was summarily ruined when he wrapped her up in a brief hug. "Good," he said. "Now, let's get out of here. I'll explain what's happening once we have some privacy." In all honesty, probably no one around them would care what they discussed. Behind them, however, was a deranged man who could not be rationally accounted for. "At least let me know what we're doing in the near term," Martha said as they not quite rushed out of the palace grounds. "We need to meet with Duke de Bonai," Antonio said. "I'll send a footman to his manor to make arrangements." As expected, a snarl of traffic greeted them in front of the palace grounds as countless carriages tried to make their way out. Antonio shook his head at the short-sightedness on display. A set of his footmen met them just outside the gate. "House Cohen is at your command, my lord," the leading man said. "4 things, for now," Antonio said. "First, send a man to de Bonai Manor to arrange a meeting with the Duke. Second, inform the knights at the camp to lock it down. I want perfect order. Third, fish Eduardo out from wherever he is. Finally, where's our carriage?" "Very good, my lord. This way." The footmen split up to carry out their tasks. Thankfully, the carriage wasn't a half-block from Earthgate. Antonio shed his coat and leaned back in his seat as they left the prime estates, absently gazing out the window as he gathered his thoughts. "So," Martha said, "what happened?" "We have a mad king on our hands," Antonio said. "He tried to levy a new tax to not only rectify the issues plaguing the crown's finances, but also to restore the full authority of the crown by winter." "By winter? But that's absolutely impossible." His finance minister said as much, but reality has no hold on Caspond. "I'll spare you most of his insane drivel, but you should know that he believes that the gods speak directly through him. He doesn't even realize that he has a civil war on his hands." Antonio felt a light touch as Martha leaned her head against his shoulder. "That is the part that worries me the most," she said. "It shouldn't," he told her. "Caspond is a madman, but he's a toothless madman. There's no way he can hold on to power now that the court has turned against him." "But has the court turned against him?" "The nobles I can see, but what about the temples?" "The temples have barely anything in the north and the vicar here in the capital is little more than our tool. While the temples technically endorse the Holy King, they ultimately serve the people. We won't have any issues with the Southern Patriarchate when they understand how far gone Caspond is." Their carriage stopped in a side lane not far outside Earthgate. As far as he could tell, word of the disastrous general session hadn't spread amongst the common folk at all. "Good. We can make this quick and painless." Within an hour, the footman sent to speak to the de Bonai household appeared to tell him that the Duke would host him for dinner. Antonio then sent for several of the most prominent members of the royalist faction, and, one by one, they arrived to meet with the Duke. Several of the conservative leaders were present, including Count Vigo and a few other protégés of the late Old Purple. They arranged themselves on opposite sides of the long dining table, and Duke de Bonai addressed them after his butler filled their wine glasses with the famed golden vintage of his territories. "Strange currents have brought us together, it seems, and there is little cause for us to celebrate. A temporary disruption, nothing more," Antonio said. "Caspond was doing little to lead us in the first place, but our little ship has hardly been rudderless." "Yet you were content to let him play at being king for months," Count Vigo sneered. "A convenient figurehead to be just as conveniently disposed of. Don't think we aren't aware of how you've exploited the northern lands placed under your care. If by exploited you mean prospered, then I don't disagree. Never before has the North been so productive." "Humph. It's just like you progressives to pursue progress at any cost." "You conservatives just have no sense of urgency," Antonio replied. "There's a whole wide ocean out there and we are but krill by comparison. Eventually, our status as a barbaric backwater will change in the eyes of the expansionist powers abroad. When it does, I would rather our home not be considered an untapped frontier filled with free resources and slaves. Cowering in your cabins and ignoring the threat will avail us nothing when those tides come crashing onto our shores." "Enough," Duke de Bonai told them. We have not gathered to bicker about the far future.
And when will we ever?
Even with all the information the trade fleets brought home with them, the conservatives cared little beyond maintaining stability and steadily cultivating prosperity. A slightly wealthy merchant from beyond the Koshi belt could probably conquer the entire Holy Kingdom if they felt like it, and the only thing that kept them from doing so was the fact that trade continued to flow freely up and down the western coast of the continent. There were other, greater powers that had motives beyond profit, however. He wouldn't be at all surprised to wake up one day to find that they had been randomly colonized by wild elves or some other race that found Roble's climes agreeable.
There isn't much for us to discuss,
Antonio said.
Caspond is mad.
He must be removed. The only thing that was keeping him in power was,
well, us.
What of his successor?
Caspond is childless.
That is a problem for the royal house. Besides, it's impossible to imagine that you could do any worse than the current seat warmer. You could put a Lanka on the throne and do far better. There were plenty of royal candidates, and none of them were especially remarkable. That meant that the Holy Kingdom would effectively be ruled by the aristocratic establishment for the foreseeable future. And, if the next Holy King managed to bring the nobles to heel, it only meant the Holy Kingdom finally had a competent sovereign again. After suffering through Caspond's escapades, this was hardly a cause for complaint. In that case, the Duke said,
what about
Princess Carlotta? Your granddaughter? After some lengthy consideration, Duke de Bonai said, I'm of the mind that a woman is better suited to serve as sovereign for the time being.
They're harmless, after all.
My late niece did little more than encourage some cursory social reform, and her popularity kept the population compliant. Another young holy queen for the people to admire from afar.
Well, your reasoning does seem
sound. We do reserve the right to question this selection should the princess exhibit any problematic quirks, however.
That aside, we hardly have the time right now for an official discourse over the matter.
His tentative concession served its purpose of mollifying the Duke, and the old man moved on to the true business at hand.
So, he said,
how shall we handle the matter of Caspond?
He's your nephew,
Antonio said. Does the royal family have no contingencies for problematic members?
Not when that member is the Holy King, Duke de Bonai replied.
If he was still just a prince, we would have just sent him to a remote estate with specialized security arrangements.
The boy could have peacefully lived out the rest of his days in isolation had his
qualities been properly vetted before his ascension.
Though the Duke had just admonished them for bickering over factional differences, his unspoken blame was clear.
Had the royalists not supported Caspond's sudden ascension, they wouldn't have found themselves in their current predicament in the first place. Antonio sidestepped the accusation, as the royalists' actions were indefensible in the eyes of the conservatives.
So you're saying he must be disposed of in a more decisive manner,
Antonio said.
And this dancing around the solution means that you do not wish to be labeled as both a kingslayer and a kinslayer. The Duke's silence was answer enough.
It was the classic conservative hesitation that had long become their hallmark.
While you may have your reservations,
Antonio said,
I believe your new bedfellow has just the tool for the job.
A certain smiling demon?
That's merely an unfounded rumor. Duke de Bonai's expression darkened. No true subject of Roble would resort to employing such means.
It would be awfully convenient if Caspond was rumored to be assassinated.
Every face across the table twisted in disgust.
Antonio held in a sigh.
They understood what needed to be done, yet balked at taking action.
It was no wonder that the passing months saw the conservatives relegated to the western fringes of the north, unable to stand against the economic dominance of their rivals. The evening's discourse indecisively meandered until a footman in Cohen livery appeared at the entrance of the hall. He walked up behind Antonio, leaning in to whisper in his ear. A group of paladins has left the palace grounds,
led by the Grand Master.
They're coming this way. Antonio dabbed his mouth with his napkin before rising to his feet. It appears that our beloved Holy King is not as oblivious as he seems, he said. I strongly advise that we disperse for the night. He and Martha barely made it around the corner before the paladin stopped in front of the Duke's manor. Duke de Bonai, you have been summoned by His Divine Grace, the Holy King Caspond Besserace, for an audience. Even when making demands on behalf of the crown, the Grand Master's tepid personality shone through. The back and forth between the Holy Order and House de Bonai faded in the distance as Antonio made his way to his carriage.
Fortunately,
The Holy Order was so woefully understaffed that it was all they could do to isolate the Duke's residence. Upon returning to his camp east of Hobens, Antonio found Eduardo waiting for him inside his tent. He frowned as he scrutinized his son's appearance. "What happened to you, boy?" A certain paladin decided that my interpretation of law and order didn't hold up to her scrutiny, Eduardo replied. "Great. More paladin problems. Explain." Antonio's butler helped him out of his garb while he listened to his son describe a disturbing event in the capital's northern quarter. In various ways, it was far more problematic than Caspond. "And you, my lord?" Eduardo asked. "It looks like the general session took an unexpected turn." "Several unexpected turns," Antonio answered with a nod. "The government of the Holy Kingdom is unofficially dissolved due to a tax dispute. As a result, the establishment has united in common cause. Duke di Bona has been placed under arrest by Caspond as its ringleader. I should have insisted on coming to the session today instead of volunteering to help our allies with their domestic issues." "It sounds like it was far more interesting." "It was nothing but infuriating," Antonio told him. "What's important now is that we unseat Caspond before he can rally any additional support." Eduardo nodded, relaxing slightly as he spoke. "What remaining support does Caspond have?" he asked. "The Holy Order and the Royal Guard." "And the temples?" "Salazar is our creature. They won't bar our path. The main concern is that Caspond somehow rallies the capital's citizens behind him. He must be silenced before he can make the attempt." Antonio was more than a bit surprised at how calm he felt. What was unthinkable not a year previous had simply become a matter of course. Despite the unprecedented control he had enjoyed over the affairs of the Holy Kingdom over the past few months, he had still underestimated what it truly meant for a kingdom to have a weak sovereign. "I'll call together the best men I know. I take it that both factions will cooperate with me?" "That's right. Rescuing the Duke should be justification enough. I trust you understand that failure isn't an option." "Yes, sir. Permission to don the house regalia?" "Granted. The future of the Holy Kingdom rests on your shoulders, son. Do us proud." Lines of worry creased the corners of Martha's eyes as Eduardo left the tent without another word. "Antonio," she said, "storming the palace to rescue the Duke means fighting the Royal Guard and the Holy Order. You've just sent our son to fight Remedios Custodio." "I know," Antonio replied,